Hello everyone, my name is Isabel Abuhamid and I will be discussing comedic calamity, why and how we should joke about racism. Race will always be a significant issue, especially in a diverse country like America. We live in a society that has trouble discussing racial tensions when I believe comedy can be a perfect outlet, which leads me to my research question. When using comedy to address issues of race in contemporary America, how can television effectively reach wider audiences? In order to answer this, it is critical to understand comedic context, as in what makes something funny. Concurrently, psychological and sociological theory play an integral role as these explain the tightening and alleviation of racial tension in society. Then an analysis will be conducted to see how this is currently being done in television. A conclusion arrived at, and I'll explain why my research is important. Benign violation explains that for humans to find something funny, it must be both benign and a violation. A violation is anything that presents a challenge to the audience's reality. Often this may be something unexpected. But this violation cannot pose a threat to the audience. It must be benign. Essentially, a joke has to be right enough to not offend someone, and wrong enough that it is not just a statement. Psychologically, mere exposure theory explains that the more one is exposed to something, the more they grow to like it. In essence, it becomes familiar. A schema is how a person categorizes information and relationships between information. In this case, it refers to a schema of Black people or the Black community. On a sociological level, contact theory explains that the more one comes in contact with someone of another race, the less likely they are to view them as other, thus loosening racial tensions between the two. The analysis covers the show Blackish and how 3 different vehicles for humor are used to address race: characterization, script, and historical contributions. The main character, Dre, an advertising executive from Compton, desperately tries to hold on to his Black culture while living in a predominantly white upper-middle-class neighborhood. Dre believes the white man is always conspiring against him. In epic juxtaposition is his wife, Bo. Bo is a half-Black, half-white doctor who was raised by hippies. She takes a very peaceful Martin Luther King approach to racism, whereas her husband, Dre, is very aggressive, much more like Malcolm X when it comes to addressing racism. The script analysis looks at the verbal jokes, and historical contribution is how the show incorporates background information for contemporary issues of race in a way that is digestible to any audience. These 2 analyses aim to compare and contrast the methods Blackish utilizes when addressing intra-community versus inter-community tensions, that is, tensions amongst Blacks as opposed to tensions between Blacks and whites. In this episode, their youngest son, Jack, performs Kanye West's Gold Digger for the school talent show and says the N-word on stage as part of the rap. The school board wants to expel him due to a zero tolerance for hate speech policy. Characterization comes in as the audience learns Bo previously fought for this policy to be enacted. By contrast, Dre encouraged this behavior in the first place by letting Jack sing along to Gold Digger verbatim every morning on the way to school. This juxtaposition flawlessly exemplifies how Black youth may receive mixed messages, possibly even from within their own family, about how to approach complex issues of race. This episode incorporates historical contributions by exhibiting common conversations in the Black community that a non-Black audience may not see regularly. For example, the difference in which situation justifies saying the word according to different age groups. Pops and Ruby, the grandparents, claim that they never say it casually and never in mixed company. On the other hand, Dre alleges that his generation reclaimed it as a word of colloquialism and power. Furthermore, the youngest of the 3 groups, Dre's daughter, Zoe, says she lets all her friends say it, including white friends, because they do not mean any harm by it. Then later in this episode, another scene takes place in a conference room at Dre's workplace. Dre's Black co-workers are listing off their rules for who can say it. Mexicans can't say the N-word, but Dominicans are okay. Puerto Ricans are cool too, unless you're a J-Lo Puerto Rican, as opposed to a Rosie Perez. Attempting to elaborate on an incredibly nuanced issue such as hate speech in the form of slurs, Blackish displays these different takes on the issue, allowing the viewers to understand just how complicated the rulebook may be and how much it varies inside the Black community, especially generationally speaking. The script to address these Black-on-Black tensions uses not only benign violations, but also intersectional perspective, mentioning other oppressed groups in America. The first joke occurs when Dre is talking to Bo after admitting he probably influenced Jack's behavior, as he gets frustrated. Comparing travel to hate speech certainly poses a challenge of reality. However, given it doesn't pose a threat, since Bo doesn't validate this argument, it effectively satisfies the requirements for benign violation. Later on, an attempt to alter the very rules she wrote, Bo calls the people that helped her create the zero tolerance policy. While on the phone, she also tries to justify herself similar to Dre, and that's where this quote comes in. Once again, a challenge of reality presents itself in the idea that Bo would call her friend a slut while laughing. But the viewer deems it dismissible in the idea that Bo explained she meant it as a term of endearment. It is important to note that both these jokes represent benign violations, and at the same time address other oppressed groups in America. This makes the jokes even more digestible to a wide audience that may not acknowledge racism toward blacks in their everyday lives. The other oppressed groups being Jews in the first joke and women in the second joke. Characterization can also highlight tension between blacks who see race in everything and whites who believe in a post-racial America. In Season 4, Episode 17, North Star, the Johnson family celebrates Easter with Bo's relatives. Dre struggles to deal with the white side of the family as he sees them rejecting his culture at the dinner table. Always the radical, he demonstrates impatience with his white relatives. This tension builds throughout the plot as Gwen, the least tolerable relative, continues to ask Bo and Dre for absurd accommodations that only a white person would feel entitled to, such as nitrite-free bacon for her therapy dog. At dinner, he notices all the white relatives, except his favorite, Gary, refuse to put black foods, cornbread, fried chicken, and mac and cheese, on their plates, which leads to the integration of historical context. Dre explains that slaves got the worst foods to eat, so they had to try to make it flavorful, with lard and heavy seasoning, justifying soul food's heavy fat and salt contents. Blackish made it humorous by starring Ted Allen and staging Dre as a contestant on the popular television show Chopped, making the secret ingredients pig intestines, weed, ham hocks, pig's feet, lard, and hot water. When addressing tensions between blacks and whites, the show uses mere exposure effect to make blacks' narratives more accessible to the white audience. The previous exposure to the show makes it familiar. An audience familiar with the show will view the situation as relatable in some way, simulating a positive attitude amongst the viewers. The digestibility of this new information is amplified after translation into a language the audience can understand, even if they have not experienced racism, as they are not black. The script in this scene comes when black and white tensions continue to use benign violations and intersectional perspectives. Before dinner, Bo makes a plate of snacks for Dre, which her mom views as being subservient to a man. When Bo tries to defend herself, Gwen, the aforementioned intolerable white relative, mentions this first quote. This is a violation because Bo and the viewer think she might actually help her out by defending her, but instead she further confirms Bo's mother's beliefs. But this stays benign because the audience does not take Gwen seriously. They view her as an antagonist of sorts. Later on, Gary, Dre's favorite white relative, appreciates black culture at the dinner table, which is where this second quote comes in. This violates reality because historically whites have viewed themselves as better than blacks. However, this violation presents no threat to the audience, especially since a white person concedes his inferiority to blacks, rather than the opposite. Just as before, these jokes both satisfy a benign violation and also address oppressed groups again, the first one being women once again, and the second one being blacks. This show does take slightly different approaches when approaching racial tension stemming from inside the black community versus outside. The characterization rings consistent in each episode regardless of what issue they address, Dre always fighting and Bo always trying to defuse the situation. The jokes seem to employ benign violation and often use intersectionalities to address all the different aspects of a person that can lead to oppression of some sort. This makes the jokes relatable in some fashion. However, when it comes to introducing historical context between the two environments, a different approach is necessary. In the first text analysis, Black on Black tension, in the episode about the N-word, Blackish integrated history with comedy using benign violation, but in the second, White on Black tension in North Star with the Easter dinner, the show uses mere exposure effect to make the issue reach a white audience. Ultimately, Blackish effectively reaches a diverse audience since it has fine-tuned the way it presents narratives. The show makes complex concepts simple by displaying quintessential conversations and situations that blacks experience. When a white audience can understand humor based in black issues, they are likely to exhibit less racism according to contact theory. In other words, if you come into contact with black culture, you're less likely to discriminate against it since it's no longer part of your schema as other. Black shows that reach white audiences are critical in America's current social landscape for two reasons. The first reason is television has become an incredibly influential media outlet due to the growth in both accessibility and popularity of online streaming and subsequent binge culture. Secondly, if a Black show cannot successfully relate to a white audience, the white mental schema of Blacks will continue to be other. The gap between the two cultures cannot be bridged by separate humor, rather the two need to mix. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.